Hi gang, welcome back as we go further into clauses, this time taking a look at a special kind of subordinate clause called the adjective clause. As the name would imply, an adjective clause is a subordinate clause that functions as an adjective. It modifies a noun. It would begin typically either with a relative pronoun, something like who, whom, whose, that, which, etc. That's not an exhaustive list, just a good start. Or a relative adverb. It's a more limited list, basically when, where, and why. The patterns for these sorts of subordinate clauses, for adjective clauses, are typically as follows. For the relative adverb form, you'll have the relative adverb plus a subject plus a verb yielding an incomplete thought, a subordinate clause. When you have a relative pronoun, the subject may be skipped, and that's what I show here. Relative pronoun plus verb, where the pronoun is the subject. Now, in our first example here on the next page, we'll see where the pronoun does occur and the subject along with it. But when you use a relative pronoun, many times a relative pronoun will be the subject of that adjective clause. Let's take a closer look at some examples. First of all, number one, as I mentioned, here's one using a relative pronoun, whom, and it is attached nonetheless to the subject, Mrs. Russell, whom Mrs. Russell hit in the head with the eraser, with a chalk eraser. So there we have our relative pronoun, whom. But the subject of the clause is Mrs. Russell, because she did what? She hit. Okay? Hit him. Actually, whom takes the place of the direct object here if we want to get specific. But nonetheless, looking at the clause as a whole, whom is a relative pronoun that ties it back to some noun in an independent clause which we haven't seen yet. We will see it used in that in a little bit. Another example here with a relative adverb, where. Where he chews and drools with great enthusiasm. Again, the subordinator, where, the relative adverb, let me see if I can get some ink out of this, starts the clause, and this is typical. You'll find them starting the clause unless they're unstated. Another adjective clause here, that had spilled over the glass and splashed onto the counter. Where's our subordinator? Here it is. It's a relative pronoun, that. Notice here it takes the place of the subject. What had spilled over the glass? That had spilled over the glass. In our first example, the whom, though a relative pronoun, just introduced the real noun in the clause, the subject noun. Here, it takes the place of both subordinator and subject of the subordinate clause. That had spilled over the glass and splashed onto the counter. Number 4, who loves pizza and crusts. Again, it's an incomplete thought, not a complete sentence. The subject and subordinator in one is the relative pronoun who. So, just to keep in mind here, adjective clauses are subordinate clauses, so they can't stand alone. And if you have the follow-along notes, you'll see that in there as a blank to fill in. That means they must be connected to another independent clause. And we'll see more of that here in just a moment. Some more examples now of complete sentences. These are complete sentences where our subordinate clause, our adjective clause to be specific, which is in blue, has been added on to or connected in some way with an independent clause which completes the thought and makes it a complete sentence. So here's our example. The lazy students whom Mrs. Russell hit in the head with a chalk eraser soon learned to keep their complaints to themselves. I guess I would too. So there we have in black, the lazy students soon learn to keep their complaints to themselves. That's a complete thought, isn't it? That's an independent clause. It could be a sentence all by itself. Whereas in our case here, whom, the relative pronoun, introduces the rest of the subordinate clause, the adjective clause, whom Mrs. Russell hit in the head with a chalk eraser. So now, what's whom describing? If it's an adjective clause, then it's describing a noun. What is the thing whom Mrs. Russell hit in the head? Students. So that arrow shows this whole clause modifies students. Which students are we talking about? The ones whom Mrs. Russell hit in the head with a chalk eraser. And this is key. Adjective clauses should appear immediately adjacent, usually after, but always adjacent to the noun they modify, which is a big hint for both identifying them and the noun they modify. Otherwise, they are known as misplaced modifiers. Just as we talked about misplaced modifiers for phrases, the same can be true for clauses. Let's look at another example. Number 2. My dog Floyd, who loves pizza crusts, eats them under the table where he chews and drools with great enthusiasm. You got a dog like that? Messy beast. But anyway, let's take a look at what we've got. Our independent clause is, my dog Floyd eats them under the table. We inserted, as we did here, right in the middle, an adjective clause to modify Floyd. Who is our subordinator? Starts the whole clause off. Who loves pizza crust? In this case, it's both the subject and the subordinator, this relative pronoun. And what are we talking about? Who's the who loves pizza crust? My dog, Floyd. You could point to either one. It's in a positive phrase. But that creature, my dog, Floyd. That's who loves pizza crust. Notice in this same example, we have a second adjective clause, where he chews and drools with great enthusiasm. Now this time, it's introduced by a relative adverb, where. What's the place where he chews? Table, that's where he chews. Or specifically, under the table, this entire prepositional phrase. That's what's modified here. Where he chews and drools with great enthusiasm. So again, we found a subordinator, and if this clause is properly placed, it will be right next to, as it is, the noun which it modifies. Number 3. Anthony ran to get paper towels for the cola that had spilled over the glass and splashed onto the counter. So here we see we've got one adjective clause tagged onto the end, and again our subordinator, a subordinate pronoun, relative pronoun, that ties into cola. Which cola? The cola that had spilled. So it needs to be right adjacent to it, and it is, so it's properly located and properly done. Now before we leave adjective clauses to let you work on some examples, let's talk about some notes on punctuation for adjective clauses. Whether or not you punctuate it with a comma really is a function of this question. Is the clause essential or non-essential? Well, what does that mean? An essential adjective clause takes the noun it refers to from general to specific. And it needs no comma. So if you got an essential adjective clause, no comma is needed. What's an example of that? Well, our sentence we had before, a dog that eats too much pizza will develop pepperoni breath. That eats too much pizza. Actually, we didn't have this before, but it's like the one that likes to eat pizza crust. Different sentence here, different clause, but a dog that eats too much pizza. Well, we just had a dog, non-specific. But when we say a dog that eats too much pizza, well, suddenly we've taken it from any old dog to a particular kind of dog, one that eats too much pizza. So it's essential, because we wouldn't say a dog will develop pizza breath. That's not true. But a dog that eats too much pizza will develop pepperoni breath. A non-essential adjective clause is one that modifies nouns that are already specific. Just further modification. These always require commas. So that would go in your blank there in your notes, always require commas. Here's our example. My dog, Mr. Floyd. Stop. Which dog is this? Any old dog? No. This is Mr. Floyd, a specific dog. So we would need commas, because we got enough. Look at the rest of, never mind the subordinate clause for a moment in blue. Never mind that adjective clause. Just look at the black. My dog, Mr. Floyd, has developed pepperoni breath. Is that complete and does it make sense? Yes, it does. Whereas up above here, a dog will develop pepperoni breath. Who says they will? I mean, under what conditions will they develop pepperoni breath? Do all dogs develop pepperoni breath? Just some dog at random might develop pepperoni breath? It needs this. This is essential to cause it to be a true and really sensible statement. Down here, we could leave it out and say, my dog, Mr. Floyd, has developed pepperoni breath, and not bother to tell you why. But here we do add that information in, and because it's non-essential, added information, we put in our commas to set it off, because it's kind of like an aside thought. We already had enough, but oh, by the way, here's more information. So again, my dog, Mr. Floyd, who eats too much pizza, comma, comma, has developed pepperoni breath. So there you have an introduction to adjective clauses. Good luck in your exercises.